photos say so much. So I know we're behind, so I'll try to not get too extensive here. A little bit, just this is who we are. This is myself, my farm with my dad and my brother. Lindsay and I have 3 kids, and my brother and I are the 5th generation on our farm. If you can see that little blue dot there, kind of the middle third of the state, that's where we are. And this is an elevation map of Kansas. All of you in Kansas or in Oklahoma are familiar with that. Oh, thank you. Okay. Yeah. And so elevation is, as many of you know, is pretty relevant to our nighttime temperatures. We're at 1225 elevation in our farm, which is actually a little bit lower for this. If you kind of look at this central corridor, it starts going up pretty rapidly as you get to the west of us. And we're right where 3 rivers, the Saline, the Smoky Hill, and the Solomon all meet. So we're kind of in a little dip there that gives us a little lower elevation, higher nighttime temperatures than some of the other area even around us compared to Wichita. It's usually, I noticed on the news, it's usually us and Medicine Lodge that are about 2 degrees hotter every night, and that impacts our summer annual crops. This is the rainfall, annual precipitation, of course, very relevant for Kansas, very dramatic change across the state, just like Oklahoma has. And so we're right, what we're supposed to be receiving is a 31-inch rainfall zone at our farm. A lot of clay in our soils, predominantly silty clay loams and silt loams. So deal with a fair bit of clay. Here's what we do. From a day-to-day basis and on a big picture thinking across time, try to have a holistic approach to our management, considering not just economic resources, which are absolutely a reality that we need to be mindful of, but also our natural and human resources as well. We have a compass on our farm to try, these 2 bottom statements is included in to kind of help us stay focused to where we're going long term when it gets kind of busy and distracting in the day-to-day emotions of farming. So we made a significant change in our system when my brother and I returned to farm in the early 2000s. A lot of farmers, change is something we all deal with. Some farms change better than others. And for us, why the difference, why the approach difference in management, why that significant change. And these are really the big factors that it came down to, the values of stewardship for us. Stack on top of that, the knowledge for us really was initially how waters are stored and captured and stored effectively. We've already talked about that in this project, how a big part of this project is increasing our capture of that water. In a water limited environment, my goal is to capture every bit of that water in my field effectively, store it until that cash crop needs it, or recycle it through the system if don't have a cash crop there, and have it available for that crop that we get paid for when it needs it. And so much of that was really what initially changed our mindset, our approach away from a tillage-based system, a tillage-based monoculture system, into a more holistic, diverse, no-till based system was water. After that, we started seeing a lot of other things as well, biology and fertility and time management that started stacking on top of that. Also, the trajectory of our resources, watching our soil resource become more and more degraded, thinking about resiliency, and then really this opportunity economically for diversification and intensification as well. I think these are important things. I get asked the question a lot when I'm at different places presenting. Well, why does not every farmer change and adopt all these systems and mindsets? And it's a significant change. We have to remember, I think, that it's a multi-generational mindset that we're working at changing the viewpoint, the paradigm a little bit, and that's a significant hurdle. And so I think to have a reminder of some of these reasons to change are important. Intensification is something we think a lot about on our farm as well. So I've tried to make this somewhat hopefully relevant to you all that's within this project. these to me, from a farmer perspective, are the things that we need in order to intensify. We need first, of course, the desire, be it either economic or agronomic or environmental reason to intensify, the knowledge of how to do it, the tools from tools as far as seeds and seeding technology, and the machinery to be able to intensify, and then adequate resources, natural resources in this standpoint to support it. Water being a very significant one, and soil, that soil water interaction is really important. And that soil resource is what we really see as the baseline for us at continuing across time to be able to intensify. So I can't really control how much rainfall we get. There's plenty of data to indicate it's going to get worse before it gets better. These extreme rainfall events followed by longer dry periods of time. July 4th, the night of July 4th, 2019, we had between 9 and 10 inches south of the little town we live close to, and it completely washed out the entire valley. Very destructive, very destructive. And so increasingly, it seems like our rains are coming within a shorter period, and instead of getting an inch and then being dry for a week and getting some good field work done, we get, for the month of May this year, we had 8 days that didn't have precipitation, then no rain through June and July virtually. So we can't control that, but what we can control is how our soils are able to handle that. So these are the 5 principles you all are aware of that we're really trying to work at incorporating when we think about our management and our cropping system. And then the bottom line there you really see is that these all, when I'm walking across my fields and observing things and thinking about our system, is, am I creating a habitat here for living things? Something would want to live in this habitat. I have a simple mind somewhat, so I think about my habitat at home, of how I like to feel, what makes me feel comfortable at home, and it's stability and insulation and food and shelter. Thinking about how can I create that for living things in our soil, out in our fields, and then just always recognizing carbon as the biological currency feeding all this. So the more carbon in the system, the more currency, the more economy, the greater the biological economy that's happening in our cropping system, which allows for intensification. So here's some little details about some kind of our cropping system today. Those are the crops that we're growing, pretty common for our area. Alfalfa, we grow more alfalfa than the average farm would. That's kind of been part of our culture for a generation, actually. We don't have any cattle that we own or livestock in-house, so that's all that alfalfa is sold and shipped off the farm, which has some inherent weaknesses in it, but also good economic opportunities, so there's a trade-off there. Triticale, we're growing a little bit of it for our own grain production as we scaled up that winter cereal cover crop in order to make that a little bit more affordable. There's still some opportunity costs there, but we're growing that on some of our, replacing a few wheat acres to grow our triticale cover crop seed. A couple of our rotations there, and some of our more less productive soils, we're doing that stacked wheat with a cover between those 2 wheats. That's kind of new, that cover between those 2 wheats. I've discussed with Romulo that a little bit. That's a tight window there, but the reason we're doing that, the reason we're doing a lot of these covers, actually, I'll blame on Dr. Dilly. I had her out about 3 or 4 years ago when glyphosate-resistant polymers were really starting to take off, and we wanted to learn more about the ecology of what favors the growth of those weeds. We went to a field that I had sprayed. This was probably about this time of year. She was at the farm. I'd sprayed that field, I think, at least 2, if not 3 times with gramoxone at that point in time. And I was like, I do not want to farm or live this way. And so we started learning about, thinking more intentionally about, what do polymers what do they need to be effective at growing? And it's high variances in temperature and the canopy. So an open and not very much competition, and free access to nitrogen. So the reason we're doing a lot of this is for weed control in the short term, and then also recognizing that long-term investment in carbon and soil organic matter and water holding capacity and increasing our biology. So we're also doing a cover after that second stacked wheat. That'd be a warm season cover that's going to freeze out, hopefully, unless we have any volunteer weed issues in it, and then go on to a warm season grass. Grain sorghum typically would be on our more upland soils. Then another cover, which would be a winter cover, triticale typically, then the soybeans, then back to that stacked wheat. In some of our more productive soils, we're doing wheat, double crop beans, cover after that winter cereal, corn, back to a winter cereal after corn, and back to soybeans, so a little bit tighter rotation there. Our alfalfa, 5 to 6 years. Big challenge that we've had, continue to work through, is establishment of it in heavy residue. We can get it up and growing really well. We prefer to do fall seeding. We can get it established really well, but in heavy residue, we have challenges with that crown establishing up in that residue instead of down below the soil surface and at winter killing that first winter. And we're constantly thinking about seed to N ratios. When I look out at kind of incorporating our crop sequences and our cover crop sequences, kind of trying to balance that seed to N ratio across time, increasing diversity, and then how can we have durable residue to maintain that soil armor. Just a few quick highlights on these 5 principles. Minimizing disturbance. We're increasingly in the spring for our spring crop seeding green. It's corn on your left, soybeans on your right, obviously. We're after the planter and seeder have gone through there, so I'm pretty pleased with that. More disturbance, of course, with the planter than the seeder, but pretty satisfied with those results there. The winter wheat, obviously, we're not seeding green, but increasingly trying to seed our spring crops green. Maintaining soil armor. This is not too long before tassel, so this would be this corn had triticale ahead of it, and so I really like what this is doing, even as we're getting into late summer here with helping with some late season weed control, not having any late flushes of pigweeds after our pre-emerge herbicides are gone, no late flushes of grass, and then really trying to, for us especially, maintain that canopy temperature a little bit cooler, I think helps us a lot when we get into that hot part of July and August for our summer annual crops. The rest of those 5 principles, I think, increasing diversity, having a root growing as much as we always having something growing. We're increasingly trying to do that, and integrating livestock are all about biological intensification. And Dr. Hatfield and I were discussing, an important part of this project, I think, is defining what do we mean by intensification. It's not always, I don't believe, intensification of increasing our yields, or maybe even increasing our, hopefully there is some increase in yields across a certain time frame, but also just this biological intensification of utilizing water for transpiration and not evaporation, like some of you guys are looking at and being able to measure. Same way with nitrogen, keeping nitrogen in the system instead of losing it from leaching or denitrification, and keeping it in the system through biological intensification. Warm season covers, we're doing mostly a 7-way mix there. The cool season, we're doing mostly just triticale and some rapeseed if we are seeding that early. The warm season one, where we are not doing it between stacked wheats, we're doing millet and forage sorghum, sunflowers, turnips, radishes, and flax. I try to include flax every time I can to increase mycorrhizal fungi, because it's a good host for that. And then here's this is that warm season cover between stacked wheats. This is this year, actually. I seeded this. So this is millet, sun hemp, sunflowers, and flax. It was late, about July 20th when I seeded yeah, about July 20, no, excuse me, a little bit later, about July 25th when we seeded this. There's just enough moisture in that stubble to maybe germinate that millet and sun hemp. I wasn't sure about the sunflowers. You can see they're not quite as present here. They're in there, but they're a little bit later. They came after rain. So that's always a real questionable window for me because it's hot and it's dry and you're out there spending money running the seeder through the field and not sure if any of this is going to come up. But gosh, to not have to go out and spray pigweeds with paraquat, to me, and to be able to capture some carbon and put back into the system, even in this tight window. We've done this for 2 years now, or we're across several fields. I'm seeing benefit to it. However, last year, I don't have replicated studies on this, unfortunately, but last year, one of our lower yielding wheat fields was one of the fields that was behind this this cover that was between the stacked wheat. So I don't know, were we having an allele? Well, one, is that real? Is it a function of the cover between the wheats, which we need to figure out? So are there allelopathic effects from the millet to the wheat? There's obviously some nitrogen tie up here. Maybe we need to use a little bit more nitrogen. Maybe, you know, we had a really dry fall, so it could have been lack of tillering and a heavy canopy. So we need to look into that more. But I really like this compared to have an open canopy for Palmer amaranths. So this will get sprayed out in the next 2 or 3 days here. Not worried as much. I did not have an issue this year or last year with volunteer wheat here, and not worried about it quite as much because we're going to have it sprayed out and dead 2 weeks before wheat seeding starts anyways. But that is more of an issue on this cover that we are wanting to let freeze out. We need to monitor that for volunteer wheat and take care of that if we need to, which means we'll have to terminate that early to give up, which gives up some of the benefit of that. But it's just something we're trying to work on our timing and manage a little bit. And I've been surprised if we can get that cover established with a little soil moisture going before we versus having it come up with a rain at the same time a lot of volunteer does. We usually don't have much issue. The last one we're really just dipping our toe in the water with is this livestock integration piece. I'm working with a neighbor who has cattle. I know very little about cattle and it's a big learning curve. So rather than try to learn all that, I'm learning, partnering with a neighbor, and he's paying me based on animal unit days to do some grazing. And this is a full season mix that we put out. So I replaced a full season crop here. So the economics are pretty fuzzy and pretty gray. And honestly, I know this year with grain prices higher, I would make more money growing soybeans here, but doing this, would like to do this on some of my own land, 1 and 7 years, to just try to, again, make a big investment in carbon and biological diversity, give a jolt to the system, if you will, and then get that rumen biology interacting with the soil biology once again on our prairie soils. A few things just about nitrogen use efficiency, an important part of this project. We think a lot about placement and timing. This is when I was planting corn this spring. It's hard to see, but I've got some, we're putting 50% of the nitrogen down roughly with a planter at planting time, 2 by 2, and then coming back around a little bit later than maybe some others in our area, closer to V6 to V8, maybe even a little bit past that at our side dress application, which we're either using liquid or more recently just spreading dry at that point in time. So we're not putting any out in the fall or on the surface at planting time or in the spring where we're more prone to loss then. I think the really big piece that's somewhat overlooked sometimes in reducing N losses is how we can biologically keep it in the system. And I don't know how well it shows up, but in the field, you can see a lot darker green areas. This is triticale cover behind grain sorghum. We see it a lot more visibly behind corn in areas where our corn yields poorly. I always have very dark green triticale with lots of growth. So it's sucking up that, sopping up all that free nitrogen that's left after that warm season grass and keeping in the system versus losing it. And I think that's a, and we see the same thing in summer, these summer mixes, that one after wheat harvest. I saw the same thing this week in that field of darker green areas of the millet sucking up that nitrogen that was left after that variability in wheat yields in that field. I went ahead, Carlos, and coined this now the RAIN project. Started out as a soil health partnership project, but it's been incorporated into this project, which I'm excited about. This is looking at that, Carlos mentioned on the opening day, enhanced practice of having cover versus no cover. Those two treatments replicated at a farm scale. It's on 80 acres. And this is just a comparison when we were wet in May, so I was a little bit later than what I wanted to be at terminating the triticale and getting our beans seeded. This would be probably the first week of June. So later than I wanted to be, but a nice visible indication of presence of mare's tail and palmers and redwood pigweeds and water hemp, all the good characters there in the no cover area. Versus in the cover, it was triticale only. This was at seeding time, probably a week later on that project. Starting to dry, I had really good moisture in the cover area and starting to get kind of questionable. That's again, this challenge of, however you want to coin it, extreme weather, if you will, of having these extended wet periods and then getting dry. These soils that are exposed dry out so fast, it's hard to get all our acres planted in time before that moisture goes away. We go from too wet to too dry pretty quickly in those exposed soils, versus that cover gives us a little insulation, a little bit of grace in that window of maintaining that moisture longer for us as we get all those acres seeded, which if I don't have to buy an extra seeder or two, that saves a lot of money. This is a picture from yesterday, actually. I don't know how well it shows up, but that's on the line. To the right is the no cover. To the left is in the triticale. You can kind of see some of the triticale left there. Since about mid-season, the no cover beans have been a little taller, a little bit bigger leaves, a little bit darker green, if you will. Carlos has done some counts out there on nodes and pods, so unclear if that's going to turn into a yield advantage to the no cover versus the cover. I'm willing to take I'm willing to give up probably about 5 bushel probably to have the benefits of the cover crop, and I'll maintain that system year over year if I'm not giving up more than about 5 bushel soybean yield because of the benefits from weed control and the long-term investments we're making. If it's 10 bushel, we're gonna have to think about some things, right? I wonder when we're late spraying out that triticale if I need to roll it down. There's some farmers looking at that. So we'll see how this turns out. This is satellite imagery, one from July 28th and the second one from August, the very end of August. And the dark green is healthy and the dark green is the no cover strips. And you can see that difference is starting to fade out later in the season, which I think, and Carlos agrees, that in-season rainfall being more effective and stored properly as we went through that dry period in the cover crop strips. So seeing a healthier plants, if you will, and the no cover strips early, but that differential as we get closer to fall has gone away a little bit on the imagery. On the right is, on the left is the residue between the rows left from the cover, and on the right is the no cover area. So another issue we have when we come out of beans and go to full season wheat, inherently we have some days in October that are 40-mile-an-hour winds, and all that bean residue blows out of the field into the road ditch. And the fields that have the cover on it, that stuff stays put. So I don't have bare soils going into a low residue time in November on those fields that have the cover, and it keeps that residue from blowing out of the field. Kind of wrapping up, some progress indicators that I look at. Are we moving in the right direction across time? These are the things from a farmer's perspective that I take a look at. Not all of them are real scientific. Some of them I just have to go out with a spade and look and spend time in my fields. But soil organic matter increasing over time. We're working with PFLA and Haney tests a little bit, but Haney he's changed his protocol a few times, so it's been hard to use that as a benchmark across time. PFLA, there's that seasonality differences that you guys are actually going to be looking at. That's been hard in some of these biological tests. So I tell you, today, still soil organic matter, are we increasing that over time, is my biggest soil test that I'm looking at. So I think this is always important. It's always fun as a farmer to come put up pretty pictures about cover crops and sunflowers and these nice things that look pretty to drive by in our fields. But so it has to be way more about that, right? It has to be economical. Dr. Dilly and I were talking about cover crop seed expense over lunch a little bit. You have to stay real disciplined on that. That's a cost that's hard to make up in the short term. Mostly doing it by offsetting herbicide expenses. Continuous improvement across time. This got a little carried away. So just a few highlights. Trial and error is really what most of us working on this from a farm level are doing, and I'm so encouraged to see projects like this to come alongside us and give some replicated scientific data and listen to farmers and what we're trying, the questions we have. That letting perfect be the enemy of good is a rough one for me. I'm always disappointed in some way on something that we're trying, but the making progress and trying new things is the most important part and trying to move forward. Profitability, that weeds and volunteer wheat and summer covers is pretty variable. One thing is land rental agreements and landowners. Some of the stuff where we're early pushing the envelope on some of our early learning on things is on owned land. And then if it works, then we will start to scale that, communicate and scale that to rented land. And each landowner is a little bit different in that process and relationship. This infinite amount of relationships is really complicated. So this reductionist approach of just looking at one thing in their system and saying, well, that was the cause of that, no longer works. So to me, it has to become more about a systems-based approach that I think this RAIN project, in some regards, I think is doing a good job of looking at that. Here's my wish list for you guys. The standard suite of tests to monitor soil health, whatever that is across time. Again, that seasonality is a little bit tricky with some of the tests that we've been trying to use in that. I think a lot of our fertilizers, something worth thinking about is as we get more biologically active soils, do we still need a P test of 20 or 25 part per